people. We have applied business studies. We are actually in the same.
Okay, I think we're going to get started now with the second portion of the panel. We've reconvened the prior panelists to join the new panelists. Excuse me, could we all please sit down so we can get started? Thank you very much. As what we did last time with the previous panelists, you have an insert with their bios, but I would like to introduce them. They're our new panelists for the second portion of this morning's discussion. I will reintroduce Jessica Pacheco, who's a student at Pima Community College and also at the University of Arizona. We also, yes. We also have Dr. Anton Nguyen, lecturer of Ethnic Studies, Asian American Studies at Northern Arizona University. And we also have Dr. Marlon M. Bailey, Associate Professor of African American Studies, LGBTQ Studies at Arizona State University. So just like what we did with the first panel, the second group of panelists will address similar talking points, such as, what do you think we can get, how do you think we can get ethnic studies and or strengthen your discipline at your institution? Why is it important to have ethnic studies or your discipline at your institutions, in Arizona specifically? And what do you think are the greatest challenges for institutionalizing ethnic studies in Arizona? So with that, we'll get started with Jessica.
Do we have a slide? Thank you. So I feel very honored and I'm very humbled to have been asked to be here with you today and to speak. And it made me think of all the hats that I wear in my life. Do I come here just as a student who's a single mother, as a student who is a small business owner, or as a non-traditional student, as I've been learned that I'm called, because of my age, so non-traditional. And what I realized that it's really about my life's journey, that my life's journey is representative of so many cultural norms that we accept. As I reflect on why we're gathered here today, I realize that the questions, the dialogue, the critical thinking were all missing parts of my early life. And the question that I ended up asking myself was, what would I say if I were brave? So if I were brave, if I were brave, I would share with you the experience of being an only child growing up in a household with 2 mentally ill parents. If I were brave, I would tell you the countless stories of being physically and emotionally abused by the people who are supposed to love and protect you most. I would say out loud that every single adult in my life knew about my abuse and did nothing about it. If I were brave, I would talk about the sexual abuse I endured by a distant family member while on vacation over summer break. If I were brave, I would recount the night that the physical abuse became so out of control that I ended up in the hospital. And I was placed in a group home, finally, in 5th grade. If I were even braver, I would confess that emotional abuse leaves longer lasting, deeper wounds. Some of those wounds which just refuse to scar. If I were brave, I would share with you the painstaking conditioning I went through as a child to ensure that I always looked perfect and peaceful. I had to become an imposter in my own life to survive. If I were really brave, I would also confess that up until very recently, I still felt like an imposter. I diminished any achievement I ever earned, dismissing each one as just a mistake, just a fluke, and always filled with the dread that someone would see right through me and see my worthlessness. If I were brave, I would share the paralyzing anxiety and stress and never-ending pressure that goes with the quest to attain perfection. If I were brave, I would show you how carefully I put myself together, how hair, makeup, clothing, and a brilliant smile became my armor to protect my raw, oozing, and overexposed skin. If I were brave, I would recount the times my mother said a kind word to me. It was always, "Que bien te ves." Of course, she taught me well. If I were brave, I would share with you the last time my father hit me. I was 22 years old. I had just become a single mother, and I was all that stood between him and my baby. If I were fiercely brave, I would admit that for most of my adult years, I allowed that blueprint of how I was built, that operating software that I came with, to govern my life. I followed the only instructions that I had. I allowed people into my life that continued those same patterns of emotional, physical, and even sexual abuse. If I were extraordinarily brave, I would own that I imposed that perfection that I used to keep myself safe onto my own child. If I were brave, I would share with you the fact that I overexerted myself in my son's life to ensure he would never suffer at the hands of another, but not even his own. If I were brutally brave, I would confess that my parenting style robbed my child from the opportunity to make mistakes and to learn from them. I robbed him of the opportunity of gaining wisdom. If I were brave, I would share with you how ashamed I felt when I started community college at 36 years of age. If I were super brave, I would tell you how I felt like an imposter every time I set foot on the Aves campus, because I knew that that was just not a place for me or people like me, right? If I were brave, I would say that the voices that I heard in my head as I stood on that university campus belonged to my parents. That you don't belong in college. College is not a place for people like us. College is not your place. What's most amazing about my story, my journey, is that it is a shared cultural experience. When I started working as a community organizer, working with high school youth, I saw this story play out over and over and over and over again. I saw these stories play out with my students. I saw it with their parents, and I even sometimes saw it with their grandparents. And that's the real kicker about history. So I Googled it because I'm like, who is this quote from? So Google tells me that it was Churchill that said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." So when the struggle ensued to maintain MAS classes in USD, I knew nothing of the history. I only knew what I saw. I saw empowered kids working to create change. I had a very visceral motherly urge to ensure that our youth had access to the history of this land. And for some, the history of their ancestors. The more I learned, the more my thirst for this knowledge grew. My gut feeling was right. Through my MAS courses at Pima, I have gained a more comprehensive perspective on my own life's journey. Through my classes at Pima, I understood for the first time my mother's struggle as an immigrant in a land where she didn't understand the customs and she didn't speak the language. And if I close my eyes, even just for 1 second, I can picture her disappointment. She was not welcomed here. And the truth is, the streets are not really paved with gold. It's only because of my classes at Pima that I even know about my father's struggle as a Chicano in South Texas. He joined the military and they gave him his GED. Even though he was not treated equally, it was the only way that he, on his own, could improve his situation. Add that to being bipolar, and that is just not a recipe for success. It's through the learning of all of this history that I've gained the greatest gift of all. And that gift is one of compassion. Compassion for the journey of others. No longer do I see perpetrators in my journey. Now I acknowledge and understand and see the struggle in their journeys as well. One of my favorite quotes, which I'm sure you all know, is by Gandhi. Be the change you wish to see in the world. So that story of that little girl does not have to repeat itself. At first, my purpose in obtaining a bachelor's in Mexican American Studies was my very own personal political statement. It was my one-woman protest. As some of you may know, I'm a little gun-shy about attending other types of protests these days. Now my goals are really different. They've evolved. My goal is now to earn my PhD, to create opportunities for the community that I come from. Pima County has one of the highest rates of teen parents. It also has one of the highest rates of women living in poverty. Ya basta. Now, what I'm left with is a fire. There's this fire, and it like burns in my belly. And these thoughts that I have about our future and what it can look like, it keeps me up at night. And now, having given you some of my history, my journey, my background, you can imagine, or at least appreciate, my coraje, that not only is there no bridge to get me from community college to a university in the state of Arizona, solely based on my academic focus, there's not even a dirt path to help me navigate that leap. But fire is fire, and I made the leap, and I was accepted into the U of A, and I will be beginning fall 2016. So I'm legal. I have my papers. And I carry this with me as a reminder when I hear the voice in my head telling me that I don't belong. I've got something tangible, something physical in this world that I can hold that tells me, yes, I do. I've got to tell you that receiving that letter has been the most impactful moment in my life. It negated all of the messages I heard as a child, and it presented endless possibilities. All of that only to find out that when I took that leap, I fell short. Most of my credits do not transfer into my discipline. Only one class counts towards my MAS core. At least that's one class, I suppose. So I graduate with an associate's degree from Pima this summer. 2 years and thousands of dollars later with one class that's a direct transfer. And that's what brings me to why I'm here before you today. Today, strong, brave, resilient, and best of all, determined. There is no reason that story should have to repeat itself. We all have a responsibility to make ethnic study classes available at the community college level. We also have a fiduciary responsibility to create strategic plans of how students can best utilize their very limited resources of time, energy, effort, money that we spend at accredited community colleges, that we have to create an alignment to the university. So this real, raw, vulnerable, compassionate woman who so very humbly sits before you today is only here because community college made it possible. The faculty and the staff of this institution believed in me when I secretly did not believe in myself. I know I put up a great front, but it's true. The amazing people that make up Pima Community College have rallied around me through some really challenging moments. And they are the reason that someone like me is officially a wildcat. Community college is the only gateway to higher education for most of these little girls and boys. It's about time that we build a bridge to support and guide them in their journey of getting here. Bear down.
Oh, it's me? Oh, I've got to follow that? Oh, my goodness. Wow, okay. I'll try to do my best. First of all, I want to thank the organizers. I'm really honored to have been invited. I wanted to thank the organizers. I'm really honored to be invited to this really important discussion and conversation about the importance of what I call ethnic studies knowledge production in the academy and the relationship between the knowledge production in the academy and what I call the streets. I'm brand new to Arizona. I've only been here for about 3 months. Was formerly associate professor of gender studies and American studies at Indiana University. And I just arrived as associate professor of women and gender studies in the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University. The last couple of weeks ago, I presented a keynote address for the Queering Arizona Conference entitled, "What We Have Left to Do, the Queer Anti-Racist Possibilities of the Black Lives Matter Movement." And in that keynote address, I queried, what does it mean to be a radical queer anti-racist activist today during these times of expanding social inequality? Widening wealth and income disparities, and increasing state-sponsored or state-condoned violence against people of color, queers, and queer people of color. This is also a time when liberal politics, which uphold the structures and systems of domination and are about greater inclusion of marginalized people within systems of domination and oppression, as opposed to dismantling these systems. Liberal politics, in my view, have become neoliberal politics. I addressed that question that I posed with knowledge production. One of the important features of this neoliberalism is to control knowledge production. We see, even in our college/universities, an organization of knowledge that emphasizes liberal identities, meaning single-issue politics, and communities advocating for more inclusion in systems of domination, not challenging and strategizing to dismantle them. So I argue that this is not only a struggle in the university, this is a struggle on the streets, and those two domains of struggle are connected. The neoliberalization of the university equals, to me, a dismantling of interdisciplinary, intersectional, critical knowledge. And one of the principles, these are some of the principles on which ethnic studies is based. For programs that what is happening is that the neoliberalization of the university is exchanging interdisciplinary, intersectional, critical knowledge for programs that advance a neoliberal, consumerist, depoliticized multiculturalism within the university. I will look at, just briefly say a few things about some of the fields that can be the sites where this can be challenged and intervene. But there's a tendency for even these fields, like gender and women's studies, African American studies, to sort of fall back on the kind of neoliberal single identity, single issue framework. And in doing so, later I will talk about how we need to think about broader cross-issue alliances, both on the street and in the university. So one of my misgivings about being at Indiana University, I was there for 8 years, was what I found to be an increasing marginalization by the administration of interdisciplinary critical approaches to knowledge that were housed in gender studies at one point, no longer I would argue, African American studies and American studies. what I began to witness was an increased emphasis in gender studies not on the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and class and other vectors of power that shape the experiences of everyday people, but an overemphasization on sexuality at the exclusion of these other aspects of people's lives and experiences. What I also began to experience in African and African American studies was an overemphasization on race as a single category of analysis at the exclusion of gender and sexuality and class issues that shape people of color's lives. And basically, the American Studies Department was increasingly becoming a neo-colony. You had the majority of white scholars working on black and brown scholars, but not wanting black and brown scholars to work on black and brown scholars. The street and the classroom. So let us consider what I mean by knowledge production on the street and the intersections between the classroom and the street. And let us consider the quotidian struggles around knowledge, including representation and recognition that take place in the academy and on the street, both of which have consequences for each space. Although the classroom and the street, if you will, are often treated as mutually exclusive domains of knowledge production and experience, I argue that the university college classroom and the street are mutually constitutive domains of knowledge production, experience, and struggle. Thus, what are the implications for interdisciplinary fields like ethnic studies, African American studies, and gender and women's studies, fields that emerged from socio-political struggle? What are the stakes for such socio-political struggles that come out of convergent and deeply intersecting domains, the street and the classroom? These are critical questions that critical race, feminists, and queer scholars have posed for decades, and these critical questions are sometimes forgotten or get lost in the daily exigencies of life in the academy and outside of it. For example, the critical problems and challenges that we face around the organization of knowledge has everything to do with our current politics, our current overemphasization on singular forms of visibility and inclusion in exclusionary domains. One of my critiques of, for example, LGBT movements, dominant sort of widespread LGBT movements that have overemphasized the inclusion in the institution of marriage and overemphasized the inclusion in the military, without really taking into consideration the ways in which these institutions are exclusionary institutions and basically are allowing for a small sector of society to be included and excluding everyone else. So the critical problems and challenges that we face around the organization of knowledge are based on three questions, I would say, that ethnic studies knowledge production can address appropriately. What, how, and who? What? Some years ago, I challenged the field of black studies to begin to more aggressively train students to work in gender and sexuality studies. In the Chronicle of Higher Education in 2012, in a Chronicle of Higher Education article in 2012 on a Black Studies conference that I attended at Northwestern University, writer Stacy Patton interviewed several black gender and sexuality scholars to respond to my critique of the field and the suggestion I made on how to redress this problem. I argued because we are not training students to study black gender and sexuality, our communities are suffering from the violences of historical forms of knowledge production that pathologize black gender and sexual relations, pathologize black gender and sexual minorities. This knowledge is drawn from, or at least impacts the ways in which public policy is crafted on HIV/AIDS prevention, for example, and how we experience marriage and family, sexual education in schools, and gender and sexual regulation. We have conceded, in many ways, to public health, behavior science, sexology, sociology, and anthropology to produce knowledge on HIV/AIDS prevention, and these disciplines have produced the racist, misogynist, homophobic knowledge of black people historically. I work on HIV prevention as a part of my work on my emphasis on Black LGBT cultural formations, and I have been a part of, or at the table, engaging with public health researchers whose knowledge production contribute to policy. Oftentimes, there is a profound misunderstanding of Black LGBT communities, a profound misunderstanding because of the narrow ways in which Black LGBT communities are analyzed and thought about and written about and studied. How? We are not training our students in interdisciplinary fields such as African American studies, and gender and women's studies to do radically interdisciplinary work and to ask research questions that both require one to draw from a variety of fields and methods and create new ways of knowing that, as transgender studies scholar Vivian Namaste argues, are drawn from and applicable to everyday communities, no matter the approach. And because race, class, gender, and sexuality are so vastly complex, we need a variety of fields, approaches, and disciplines to draw from in order to deal with and make sense of that complexity. Who? The knowledge about Black folk, for example, and people of color, particularly on gender and sexuality, for example, is not produced in the academy by people who come from these communities. There are ways in which we continue to be institutionally invested in the neo-colony in the academy, whereby we fail to facilitate the capacity for people of color to produce knowledge by and about themselves. So the keynote, I asked, what we have left, and I wrote left in all caps, left to do. It is around changing the way we approach knowledge production, and I think this gets to the questions that were posed at the beginning of the panel. It is really important that students organize on campuses and organize and build cross-alliances around larger issues of social justice and domination, and demand that organizing and the politics be underpinned by knowledge production in coursework, and not just who we hire in terms of faculty, but what we teach and how we approach what we teach. Students should demand, even in interdisciplinary programs, that those interdisciplinary programs be interdisciplinary. We need to demand that queer studies and women and gender studies focus on intersectionality, queer of color critique, critical race theorizing, and challenge dominant narratives of history, of anti-racist and queer struggles that do not consolidate around marriage equality, gays in the military, and legal recognition. And we need to emphasize the linkages between what many queer theorists like myself call bottom-up knowledge production to inform bottom-up grassroots-based solutions. Finally, I would argue that the organizing among students also needs to be collaborative among faculty and staff, and that not only do we need to change the curriculum at these universities and colleges that more accurately reflect the communities that we want to be on the campus and who are on the campus, but we also need to work with administrators and push administrators to prioritize, because I know we hear, and I know there are administrators in the room, no shade as we say, but I have heard time and time again, oh, there's no money, oh, there's this, we've got shortage of resources. Administrators have priorities, and those priorities need to be addressing issues of interdisciplinarity, ethnic studies, critical race knowledge, queer studies, and engaging students from a variety of experiences and having that curriculum reflect their experiences. Thank you. I'll end there.
This one work? Hello. All right. Xin chào tất cả mọi người. Rất vui khi được đến đây. I know just only me understanding what I just said. So let me translate into. I always died for saying something in Vietnamese, my mother tongue, you know, in front of people, but this first time. So I just said hello, everyone, and it's been a great pleasure to be here with you guys, and I'm shocked and awed with all the people, especially, you know, these is wonderful panelists, you know. It's really hard for me to say anything now after hearing the wonderful personal story and highly intellectual engagement from this lady and gentleman right here. So anyway, I will go back to focus on the questions that we were politely asked to address in speaking in here. So my name is Anton Nguyen. Please, you're going to mess this up, so just call me An. I'm from NIU. It's Northern Arizona University. For those of you who are not very familiar with the mountainous area up there, it's beautiful, it's expensive. We call it poverty with a view. So that's what we said. It has a lot to do with the state of Northern Arizona University because we are the most neglected. We are the least paid community of scholars up there within even the system of public university here in Arizona, right? And unfortunately, we at the faculties of ethnic study program at Northern Arizona University are the least paid faculty in the entire NAU. Why I say that? Because again, it's very expensive to live up there. And last year, NAU's newspaper just released the information that the average salary for faculty of ethnic study program at NAU is $51,000. We are being paid the same with the university law enforcers. Now, there's something in here. When they said $51,000, they probably was calculating the people who are not the core faculty members of the ethnic study program. The majority of them in sociology, English, in other departments, because we knew that most of us actually paid less than $50,000. I have to really focus on this one because, again, we are going to talk about money and how money relates to the state of ethnic study, in Arizona, right? I graduated in 2013. When I had the offer from NAU, my advisor, also my very dear professors, asked me, "Are you sure you want to go to Arizona to teach ethnic study?" I said, "Sure." Never regret that, right? There were several reasons for that. First, because the other two offers, neither of them was tenure track eligible either. One of them was in a very cold place. I stayed in Ohio for 6 years, and I'm from Vietnam. So I said, man, that's enough with the cold. The other in the deep south. And I don't want to offend anybody, but, I'd rather go to another place, rather than deep south. And, being born and raised in Vietnam my entire life and having degrees in American cultures, I'm always fascinated by the idea of the frontier cultures and all these kind of things, right? That's why we end up in here. Well, I'm going to kind of go over the history and the current status of the ethnic study program at NAU, so that before I can go to Asian American studies, the discipline the sub-discipline that I represent in here. Ethnic study program at NAU established in early 2000s. After countless efforts by African-American student communities at the university who even led the sit-in campaign demanding to have ethnic study and African-American studies taught, at NAU, because they felt they lacked the absence of, their cultures, representations of African-American cultures. And then after that, we also have the countless efforts of the 5 hardcore faculty members at NAU who fought tirelessly to have the ethnic study program. So we finally got it. But the history of ethnic study program at NAU is not an easy one, right? So we first hired 2 faculty members for ethnic study program. And of course, started as a small program. We had faculty members across campuses, from English, from sociology, from those programs, right? Departments, bigger departments. We had the first one African-American female professor who was a split position between English and ethnic study, who unfortunately decided to leave NAU. The second one was a split position, another African-American female professor, a split position between sociology and ethnic study, who, again, unfortunately decided to leave ethnic study to go back to sociology, and then who recently left NAU too. So the first full-time tenure-track faculty we had was Dr. Ricardo Guthrie. Some of you probably know him. He's an African-American scholar. He's a stellar scholar. And when I came to NAU in 2013, he is the only full-time faculty who was in tenure track eligible at the time. The history of ethnic study at NAU, as I heard, was a painful one from other folks who told me that, because there were times in the history of our program, the administrators did not really want to have ethnic study at NAU at all. So there was no hire for quite a while. I came in 2013 with another colleague of mine who's an African-American scholar. Right now, we like to think that we are, the only and probably the only ethnic study program that have the biggest faculty bodies in the state of Arizona. Right now, we have 7 full-time faculty members in ethnic study programs over there. So, and the good news is that we recently have 2 faculty members being offered tenure tracks. Dr. Frederick Gooding, he was offered tenure track in African American study in 2014. This year, last year, 2015, we have Dr. T-Mac Montoya, who was offered a tenure track in ethnic study, in the sections of Mexican American studies. So right now, we are probably in a good shape, like many people would say, right? So, question is, if we are so strong, so why we still have problem with ethnic studies in the state of Arizona? And are we really strong saying that we are now having 7 full-time faculty members? We are hiring 1 more tenure-track faculty members this year, and right now I'm in a committee that we are hiring another lecturer, a full-time lecturer for ethnic studies over there. The problem is, people come and people leave. The last 2 years when I came here, I saw 3 stellar scholars, dedicated, highly dedicated teachers, and wonderful colleges left for other universities and other organizations. If they was living for tenure track somewhere else, we understand. But the majority of them actually left for the jobs that are technically very similar, the same, or less. Some even went out of the academia. She really was in love with academia, but something wrong that she decided to take up. Everybody else who's not on tenure track over there in ethnic study from Arizona, Northern Arizona universities are on the verge of leaving it. That, including myself, I have to admit that. Now, in the job market today, we know that unless you have a very fancy degree from the Ivy Leagues, or unless you are very stellar scholars, it's really hard to land a job, especially in ethnic studies. How many ethnic study departmental programs we have across the country, right? But NAU and the state of Arizona has something that make people upset, I would say. Now, I'm saying people because I'm saying here as an international scholar. Again, I just received my green card, but I'm still holding a Vietnamese passport. I still think it's amazing, thinking back about my other Asian, people before the Second World War who was not eligible for, naturalization or no green card at all. So, or other less unfortunate, migrant workers out there who are living undocumented lives here. It's still some kind of privilege that we have in the academia. But personally, as a person who does Asian American studies at NAU, I felt my department is like my home, where my friends, my colleagues are my best friends ever I've made my entire life. On the other hand, I felt so alienated, maybe because we live up there in the remote area, but because the sub-disciplines of Asian American studies is something totally alien up there, and maybe in the state of Arizona. I went to many conferences, and as a scholar, we also read, millions of articles and books. I rarely know anybody from the state of Arizona who actually, does a job in Asian American study. Maybe just because of my ignorance, maybe because of that. But it also tells you that being Asian living in Arizona is difficult. And being scholars, teaching and researching Asian American studies in Arizona is even more difficult. We strived to build a department. We have been proposing to upgrade from a minor in ethnic study to a major in ethnic studies. We have everybody up there. By the way, at NAU, we have a department Applied Indigenous Studies, right? And in our department, we have scholars representing African American studies, Latina American studies, but when it comes to Asian American study, the university is not interested. I am the first official teacher to be hired to teach Asian American study at NAU. So what does it tell you? A school with a history of almost 100 years, if I'm not wrong, with a school, with a campus with more than 18,000 students, and we have 25,000 students, in the state of Arizona, including all other campuses. And I am the first guy to be hired to teach Asian American study. Don't you see something is very wrong about that? We fought really hard to have tenure track lines for our faculty, and we were very successful. We demanded. We came to the president's office. We talked to the president. We said, hey, let's give us some, we have excellent scholars in here. Let's give them some tenure track, otherwise they're leaving. And they surrendered. I mean, year after year, we have scholars being given tenure track. But when it comes to Asian American study, it's no. Now, we voted, it's already in our agendas for years, that after African American study, we will have 2 tenured and tenure track scholars, and then Latina American studies, and then we would hire at least a person in Asian American study. The other previous 2, they was okay with that, but when the president of NAU last year, she promised that she would give us another tenure track line, the first official national search for our program over there, for ethnic study program. We voted, the steering committees of dozens of people voted anonymously for aligned in Asian American study when it was submitted to somewhere up there, provost office, president office, we didn't know. They just crossed anything with Asian American studies. Instead, they asked it, they demanded that we have to specifically name the high something with environmental sustainability, health sectors, and informatics. I still don't know what informatics have to do with ethnic study. But more importantly, we have to look for somebody who's going to bring $1 million grant to NAU. Now, I still don't know if you can bring $1 million grant, would you go to NAU or not? Seriously, right? So all these are the kind of things we say that we have to go with the flow, because that's what's happening here in our public university. You know, you have to bring the money so that you could have the tenure track. One thing is very obvious, that a person like me, I feel very, very much discriminated against, because whenever it comes to the Asian guys, it's a no-no. You know, I quoted a saying from one of our administrators over there. It's not like a wrong or inappropriate to hide an Asian Americanist at this time. It's just not about the time. So when you say something is not wrong or inappropriate, it's already wrong and inappropriate in their mind, right? We know this is not California. This is Arizona. We know that. But does it mean that our students don't need Asian American study? I think not. I have students who sent me letters, who gave me the first edition books, which published in 1901, and those kind of things, saying that this is one of the best classes I've taken my entire life. Thank you so much. Before this, I didn't know anything about the Asian American communities. I was so ignorant. I mean, so the kind of things proved well that we've been working really hard, and we offer these classes not only to our Asian American students, but to students of color and white students too, who feel enlightened taking our classes, who know that people of color does not necessarily mean, in the state of Arizona, Mexican American study, Native American study, and African American study. There are 20 million Asian Americans out there, and we are human too. Our cultures need to be taught. Right? So when we look back at the connections, the links between community colleges and public universities here in the state of Arizona, I'm critical, but I'm a very optimistic guy, right? I see these students coming to my classes, very, very excited, taking these classes, and many of them attending NAU because they was not accepted, I'm sorry, at ASU or U of A. They had to do that, and again, like some of you already said, the majority of those students are students of color, right? We are at NAU very proud of serving one of the largest population of Native American students and Mexican American students up there. Many of them transferred over there. So we designed courses not to show off to students, not to impress them how intellectual you are, how cool we are, our degrees and stuff like that. We designed courses so that when they come there, they take our courses, they don't feel the gap between their community college education and the higher 4 years university education. They feel just like at home. And that's what we've been trying to do. And I think that is the task that U of A, ASU, and NAU teachers have to do. I mean, at the end of the day, research institution or not, we still have to teach our students. We cannot let them behind, feeling totally intimidated by the courses that do not relate to them with their real life experience, that do not encourage them to participate in their learning in a very positive way and very, meaningful way. So for me, that is the important things that we have to do in order to articulate the community college level to the university level, right? So after all, I want to end my my speech right here by saying that I'm still in love with Arizona. After all, it's beautiful over up there in Flagstaff. Every day you walk up, you look at the picture, the mountain, you say, oh my God, can this be true, right? So Arizona, people say it's difficulties, it's challenges. For me, actually, it's opportunities. And I believe that we can do it if we really work together instead of being isolated, right? Thank you much.
Thank you so much, all of you panelists, for the powerful, heartfelt, honest discussion. I think your words and your passion, your dedication to your discipline have touched us all profoundly. Am I right? Yes. So now we're going to open up the floor for questions for the panelists. We have 2 students here with microphones, so if you will like to ask a question, please raise your hand and they'll provide a microphone for you. Okay, we have one right here.
Okay? Yeah. I'm a history teacher on this campus, and for me, obviously, ethnic studies is a very important part of covering history properly. But the question I have is about naming, about words, and it started with you, sir, when you started talking about Indian American studies. And then when you, sir, talked about queer studies and so forth. And I'm older than all of you, and I remember vividly the ways in which what we call people, groups of people, have become contentious and symbolic. And for somebody like me who really wants to address my students and their concerns with respect and dignity, what are some of the best resources, apart from just talking to the students, which has its own fraught aspects, of finding out what is the most appropriate, sensitive, and yet direct way to refer to the different aspects of ethnic studies to the people it affects?
Thank you for your question. I think that's something that in Indian studies, use that term loosely, across the country, that we need to solidify. We use the term American Indian Studies primarily because the term American Indian is used in the majority of the legislation that is passed for American Indian people. If you take a look at the United States Constitution, they mention Indian tribes and Indian people. So that's one of the reasons why we use that term. Native American is used less, but it's also accepted. The term indigenous is also part of it, but indigenous sort of encompasses more people, and in some ways it can diminish tribal sovereignty because tribes determine their own membership. And if you say you're indigenous, you can be indigenous, meaning you can have, you know, your DNA from Ancestry.com tells you you're Indian, but are you a citizen of a nation? Are you enrolled, an enrolled member? Those are 2 different things. And a lot of folks don't understand the complexities behind that. I will say the one term that we are still trying to do away with is the R word. There's a Washington team, I don't know if you guys follow NFL football, that's still in contention when it's 2016, when we should say we should be doing away with those racist ideologies and racist terms. For your classes, however, as a history teacher and professor, use your best judgment. We are in Autumn land, and the Autumns like to be called Autumn, you know? So I will leave it at that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's a very complicated question that you asked, but a very important one. And I don't have a single answer for it, but what I would say is 2 things. One is that the naming is reflective of organization of knowledge and experience and the way in which we narrate our experiences. So when we talk about identity, it is a very shifting, constantly evolving process. And part of the virtue, I believe, in queer knowledge and also interdisciplinarity is a recognition of the processual nature of identity and naming. And the more we know about ourselves and the better we are able to narrate ourselves, also is the way that we challenge historical violences that have been inflicted on us by misnaming us and misrecognizing who we are. The second thing that I would say is, and this gets to what is so central and important about interdisciplinarity, is that it is necessarily messy because it reflects the complexities and the messiness of our lives and our experiences. And it is, and the accurate way of naming evolves out of that engagement with the messiness, the confrontation with the messiness. So one of the examples, and this is the second point that I make, one of the examples is that in gender and women's studies, and gender and sexuality studies and gender and women's studies, I learn a lot from my students. I mean, I'm 47. When I was in school, you know, cisgender, queer, masculine of center, all of these terms, they didn't exist for me. I didn't even know what those terms were. But also as an ethnographer that works on black LGBT communities, I learned from people in the community. And I am witness to the process in which they're engaging to better understand themselves and therefore better name themselves and better represent themselves. And so as a professor of gender and sexuality studies, I learn from what my students come into class say, you know, this is a masculine of center, this is an aggressive gender category. I'm like, oh, okay, you know, and so because I understand that I'm always learning, yeah, indeed, I have done a lot of work on gender and sexuality, but I'm always learning from my students, and I'm always learning from engaging with communities, other communities, as well as the communities from which I come.
Hi, my name is Felicia Medrano. I'm with Amistades, a Latino substance abuse organization, and this question is directed to Dr. Leo Kilsback. I have taken a Native American wellness and health course, and we have gone over the historical trauma of just ethnic genocide to boarding schools to being confined into these reservations. And what I have noticed working in my organization and doing some work on the reservations is the Native Americans obviously don't really want our help. It's very hard to reach that community and work with them. And I was just wondering what we could do to heal our relationship with the Native Americans and what we can offer.
That's the $10 million question. The discipline should be dedicated to challenges like that, working with the community, healing, key term, key word. I think in Indian country there's a lot of pain, and we're struggling to confront it because of that legacy of genocide, and trauma is the term that they use. And I think it's difficult for non-Indians and outsiders to deal with it, but I think it's especially difficult for American Indians because you know, we're a happy people, we're proud people, and a lot of times when we we don't necessarily like to bring up issues. Back home, I'm saying this, thinking about my own reservation, my own community, because the pain is still there, but it manifests itself in so many different ways, and it's connected to our contemporary lives. And then when we try to bring people out of the, out of the illusions, you know, it can be challenging. So, you know, your question and the challenge before you is something that we have to deal with. And I'll tell you, well, we as Indian scholars and as Native scholars, we have to navigate through that, because there are field scholars who are maybe they themselves are confronting their own historical traumas or their own challenges, that they're unresolved grief. They haven't healed, and maybe they don't realize that. And sometimes they don't make it to college, they don't make it to grad school, they don't earn the master's, they don't earn the PhD, so they can't be in these positions to help and facilitate healing. That should be a priority, and in our program we make that a priority, because at ASU, American Indian Studies, we have 10 faculty, and all of them are American Indian, and we all come from American Indian communities, and that's unheard of throughout the country. You know, they're unquestionably Native. You know they're Indian. So when Indian students take the courses, they know they're getting a perspective, that they understand that they come from the reservation, they understand the complexities behind it. In other programs, that may not necessarily be the case. So you have students who are learning about themselves from someone who may have Indian descent, or may claim to be Indian, or may have a desire to help Indian people, but may not necessarily understand the pain and the trauma that continues to exist. And that's something that requires time. It requires more young people going out and getting their education, and also the older generations fostering that younger generation and giving the younger generation a chance. I think that's something that is part of the colonial legacy too. We have become the oppressors and have oppressed ourselves too much. And so that, you know, that's the best answer I can give at this moment. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynn Saul, and I teach Humanities 260, which is a multicultural humanities class where we address history, literature, art, and music of the four major ethnic groups. And I think all of us in this room are committed to ethnic studies. But my concern is with the articulation aspect of the program and the whole issue of both college administrators, but even more so the state legislature and the governor, who are against this. Almost every one of my students in Humanities 260 over the years has said to me, why didn't I learn any of this in high school? The break between what is taught to our students at the high school level and what is available to them at the community college and the university level is, you know, it's like night and day. And what can we do to change that, or to make that less of an issue than it is now?
So when we're speaking about education and and what that looks like, we have to vote different people into. That's it. So the aggression that we have faced at wanting agency, wanting to be heard, and just even wanting to know our history, like we keep getting this pushback. So in order for that to change, the makeup of the legislature at the state level needs to change.
I just wanted to add to that, and totally second that. There is a reason why legislatures, especially these kind that are in office, want to stop ethnic studies knowledge, because ethnic studies knowledge will critique the system of domination that they are invested in maintaining. Good reason. And so, and this is not just happening here, this is happening all over the country, all over the country. And so it's really, really important. I'm born and raised in Michigan, and you all have heard about what's going on in Michigan, right? It's really, I cannot re-emphasize this enough. We have to get rid of these people in office. You have to, I mean, that's one of the primary ways. And the work doesn't stop there, but it can begin there, because that is the only way that we're going to be able to really change the kind of knowledge and education that people are getting that will inform and infuse the civic engagement that can take more control over how we educate our young people and how we educate our college students.
I'll just say one quick thing, just because my mother would say all my responses just put more work on the people who are already doing a lot of work. But at least as far as some of the colleges I know in Maricopa, we've sort of taken it upon ourselves to, if those things aren't happening in the schools, then make a place for them on your campus for those things to happen. So there are all kinds of ways when you have students there for, whether it's a math competition, that you make them aware of, you can study ethnic studies here when you get here. Even in that just marketing, providing, an instructor who wants to go to a school and talk to a class about something. And occasionally doing those subversive things, hitting people where they live, in that, that dual enrollment money. So if I go and observe someone's class and they're teaching a humanities class in high school and I see their syllabus and there is nothing on that syllabus, depending upon the class, about people of color, about doing critical thinking, about race, about gender, then you mention that, and if people still want to get their dual enrollment dollars, it may be a cursory thing that they do the next time you see them, but they're, maybe your Langston Hughes poem shows up, right? So you have a start, so maybe then the students begin to demand more, right? So if they begin to see that there are other things that they can actually study in high school, then, if they get the support from us and they see that other people can actually study that, you can make a life and a career as people have jobs, right? Then I think that becomes more available to them, and they become more aware of it in their own thinking, and so then they can demand that of their instructors. Because I've met some high school, I used to teach high school, and so I know that some of those instructors, they sort of live in a different level of fear than many of us at colleges do. And so I think if they knew they had support from other faculty, from their students, that then, again, you vote people out of office and you have support. If there's enough of us, then that them, no matter how big it is ineffective.
I guess you're the superstar, Dr. Kilsback. Sorry to pick on you. But getting back to one of the initial questions we're talking about here about the Ethnic Studies Articulation Agreement, that process, what do you feel is the ideal role for our tribal nations to take in this undertaking?
Thank you. That's a very complex, I guess, initiative. And I looked into it a bit. I think because there's a large population of Native students in schools off the reservation, Indian studies becomes very, very important for those students. Native history, not only Native history, but contemporary issues, reading and seeing Indian leaders, historical and current, that's something that really changes the mindset of a child. We tend to think that because Indian communities and Indian the majority of Indian people live on reservations, that in Indian country it's fine. The education system is okay. Indian students can grow up and learn their history, which in a lot of cases, yes, learn their language, yes. But as far as what's articulated in what the goals of American Indian Studies are, that's really not there. Emphasizing on tribal sovereignty, treaty rights, the concepts of the government-to-government relationship between tribes and the federal government, things like that. Those types of things, they need to be a priority for priority for Indian tribes, and Indian community members who are off the reservation, who send their children to schools that are off the reservation. They need to also organize and make their voices heard, that these topics be discussed as well. That's something that is very challenging. I'm a parent myself, and my son, he's not in school yet, but I'm kind of afraid that I'm going to have to engage in some of these battles that my mother engaged in. Why aren't you talking about these things? Why aren't you educating? I went to a border town school on a reservation in Montana where, a third of the population of the students were Indian. And we had one Indian studies class taught by, with all due respect, by a white guy who really didn't know what was going on in Indian country. But that was their way of, and then when I graduated, they did away with the course. It was unimportant. And if you understand the dynamics of a border town, on a reservation, and the problems associated with racism, discrimination, the injustice, man, that is something that I think was a huge contributor to the persistent challenges. This is the borderlands. This is, the borderlands on multiple levels. We have a large population of American Indians in Arizona. There is no reason why the Indian studies should be part of this discussion of ethnic studies. We need to train people who are ethnic studies teachers and professors to understand and be able to teach the unique, not only the same or the unified struggles against racism and inequality that Indian people share with Mexican Americans and African Americans and Asian Americans and so on and so forth, but also their unique struggle to remain autonomous and to be who they are as indigenous people. So the challenges are before us, but I'm very optimistic as well. I think if we join powers and work together and not let the powers that be divide us, I think we can really make some movement and cover some areas that need to be covered. It's long overdue. It really is. So I hope I answered your question.
One thing that has always bothered me is what critiques us as an American. Our country is founded on immigrants and other things like Native Americans, of course. But one thing that has always bothered me is, why can't we just be American? Why does it have to be Mexican American? Why does it have to be Native American, African American, Asian American? Like, why can't we just be American? We're born here. People come here looking for freedom, a new life. It bothers me to see our world so, segregated, and it gets to me,
Can I answer your question by asking you a question? What is America to you?
America is a free land where people came to start a new life for their families, for themselves. And yet, it's so hard for the daily American or, you know, Mexican or, you know, whatever you are to, you know, start it. It's always about these European, like, I don't know.
But you started by saying that we are a land of immigrants. But in my question to you about what is America to you, you left that out. You said that we are the land of the free and people came here to be free. Well, this land was stolen, first of all, and genocide was committed. I mean, we have a history built on slavery and genocide. So let's be clear about that. And there's trauma connected to that generation after generation after generation. But to just get back to my point about asking you, if you acknowledge that we are a land of immigrants, then why is that not, in your view, based on what you just said, why is that not America?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, it's just, I guess it's just something that gets to me. I understand that our country's done bad things. I don't know.
I'd like to thank you for your question, and I'll try to answer it. I mentioned I have a son, and it's frightening to know that he's going to experience the same racism that I experienced. He's gonna, and I am doing everything I can to try and make it so he doesn't have to. Reaching across the table, educating other folks. And we, as Native people, because we're so diverse, there's 567 federally recognized tribes. That's diverse. Our languages are different. Our cultures are different. Yet, one fundamental value that we shared on the plains, you know, buffalo hunting, horse riding Indians, that we shared in the perception that others could become our relatives. Other people could become our relatives. And when Europeans came, they didn't necessarily have that same perception. And so that creates a lot of conflict. Now, if that philosophy that anybody can become your relative was universal or was spread, then I think, yes, we could do away with our labels. We could. But that's not how it is now. Now we are, you know, for a long time we've been divided. And it's very, very unfortunate, but it's reality. And when I was a child, I encountered my first racist experience, or whatever you want to call it, at the age of 6. At the age of 6. And then I'm thinking, this is nothing compared to what my mother experienced, what my grandfather experienced, what, 20, 30 generations, or I should say 7 generations back, when they were actually, shooting Indians for fun, what they experienced as far as racism is concerned. So we have a lot of progress to go, and I like the idea of our philosophies. It's in numerous Plains Indian philosophies as well as others through our clanship system, that any person you're around could potentially become your brother, your father, your sister, or your little cousin or whatever. It's relational, and I think that's very difficult for a lot of people to accept, especially folks who have stereotypes of others, who are bigoted. They don't want to associate with anyone. They don't want to even see an option on the ATM machine of different languages. I like that. It's a little quiz, test my Spanish out for once, But you see, those are the things that we have to overcome. And I'd like to thank you. Hopefully I answered that question.
And I would just like to add something to that, something I wrote a while back, about how important culturally diverse and accurate education is. Because in order to see each other as humans first, we have to celebrate our humanity. And in any given belief that we have is secondary. And so when we strip someone of their cultural ancestry, that's when what is very delicately woven in what we call society, that's when it begins to crumble. Because then, through that lens, the otherness is actually created.
Sorry. I want to contribute to the discussion. I've been introduced earlier. I'm Dr. Puta. I'm from Nigeria. I'm a Fulbright scholar. This is a very interesting discussion we're having here, and I'm very pleased. Jessica has answered or said something that I wanted to say, but I want to go ahead to say something further. History, of course, is very important, and if I look back, as a Christian, I read the Bible. Cain and Abel were of the same parents, if you believe the history of the Bible. And Cain killed Abel. They were of the same parents. And if you look at history, generally all over, it has been the same pattern. Even within a family, you may see a son trying to take dominance over other sons. And once you have such a situation, you usually have problems. So one is that people have to rise above their history and make progress, because the issue of genocide and violence is all over the world. It has been human nature. And I've given you a typical example. Even within a family, two sons, one kills the other one out of jealousy or whatever. And in fact, when I came, I was given a book by one of the Pima staff, written by, I think, Alfredo Guariz, a former senator or so. And he's from, his grandparents came from Mexico. I didn't even know that aspect. But I gained a lot of knowledge through it. And so what I want to say is that, yeah. So what I'm saying is that that the story of when we came and where people are coming from all over the world has been essentially the same. But I think the American experience is so good because I look at America as an excellent place, as a perfect place with peculiar challenges. But these challenges are not only peculiar to America, they're all over the world. So I'm happy that there's a discussion like this that will help people to come together and continue to forge ahead, despite what the past may be. In fact, we have a very clear example. Like I read two of the books written by President Obama. One is Dreams from My Father, and the other one is The Audacity of Hope. And after I read those books, I concluded that this guy is a genius. And recently I described, when I met the Chancellor, I described Obama as a perfect mix of white, black, and black. The mother was white, the father was an African, not an African-American, an African, a man who came from Kenya. He was already established in Africa, came here, took a PhD. In the process, he got into a relationship, and Obama was born. And of course, the wife is African-American, but today he's the president of America. He rose above all the challenges described in his books, and he's the president of the United States of America. So America has gone ahead. America is moving ahead, and I like this discussion. And I want to tell all of us nobody should rise above and and get to the top. Thank you.
I just kind of want to follow up on Ruben's question. I was raised in the 90s, and one of the things that I think is a challenge for my generation is we were raised with color blindness. That was a big, big push for us in public schools. And I'm curious to see how that, you guys think this is actually going to affect ethnic studies when so long we have been pushed that we cannot see color. We are not supposed to see it. We are all the same. How is that going to affect ethnic studies?
That I think that that's a question that would take a class to. One of the things that I can say to that is part of what we get mixed up, what we conflate, and what ethnic studies, the tools that ethnic studies teaches you, is that there's a difference between race and culture. And that if we conflate or merge culture with race, we are, in some ways, you know, race is a social construction. It is not physiologically real. There's no physiological basis to it. Social construction. So that is a part of imposition. It is a part of colonial imposition. Culture is something different. Culture is something that we make as people, that we create and make, and it's changing. If we put all of our weight on race, and then you are encouraged to be colorblind, which I think is, you know, a totally false premise in and of itself. But let's set that aside. Then the things that make this society or enriches this society and enriches people's lives and experiences are then wiped out, because it's like, oh, it's race, we're supposed to be colorblind, so we don't look at culture, and we don't make sense of how important culture is as a basis of our society. The thing that, and the reason why I asked, and I also appreciate your question, but one of the reasons why I asked you that question about what is America is that there is a way in which we want to amalgamate the very complexities of culture that enriches who we are as a people. We want to amalgamate that into this thing called American culture, which obliterates, eviscerates everything that makes this country what it is. It is a country of immigrants. It is a country of indigenous people and immigrants. And so, in all of which come with vast complexity, vast language complexities, vast experiential complexities, relationships, ancestry, histories, all of that. And to me, in terms of the importance of ethnic studies, is that ethnic studies gives you the tools to make sense of that. And to make sense of that in terms of how it creates who we are. Not as a way, including the violent history, including the trauma, right? Because we all have our histories, and we don't want to like pick and choose what history we have. We can't do that. History is history, no? So ethnic studies gives you the tools to make sense of that, and to also better understand other people in your midst, and also understand how culture actually works, how it enriches, but also how it has been a form of survival for a whole range of people and experiences here. So that would be the long answer to a much broader question, but we have to sort of not conflate race and culture.
Actually, this is more of a comment than a question. And also, I'd like to say that your answer is simple, and it's as simple as that. Get involved in the political process. If you don't, you're going to miss out anyway. That's where the money's coming from. That's where you're going to get funded. If you don't get involved in the political process, we're going to be having these type of conferences all the time. And nothing's going to be done. My next comment is, we need, and I'm addressing teachers and professors on this. We need to know when there's a limit to our leadership. We need to start mentoring younger people to step in our shoes. The biggest issue with the black community here in Arizona is you have dinosaurs here. You literally have dinosaurs here. Nobody's mentoring a young, brilliant black person to take their place. That's the issue here. And that's across the country. We have to stop stifling our potential leaders. There's know when to step down.
Thank you, everyone, for that outstanding conversation and dialogue with the question and answers, and thank you for your responses. If you could please stay there, we have a certificate for you. And before that, I'd like to say, because we commented about administrators not being or being supportive, and as acting provost, I give you my word that I am in total support of ethnic studies at Pima Community College, and to support the articulation task force, the resolution, and I know that there's some administrators here, if you would like to raise your hand in support also. We have several here. So at Pima College, we are in support of ethnic studies. Okay, so now we have a certificate, and I would like to ask Dr. David Doré, who's president of the Downtown Campus and Northwest Campus, is going to help us distribute and shake hands with the panelists. So I will call each person's name individually, and you will be handed a certificate. So we'll start with Dr. Leo Kilsback. Next, we have Dr. Anton Nguyen. Next, we have Dr. Marlon M. Bailey. Next, we have our student, our wonderful student with that incredible story, Jessica Pacheco. Yes. And we have Donna Thompson. And since Dr. Ana Ochoa Leary had to go back to the university to present at their version of what we're doing here, we have Sophie Alves, who's going to be receiving her certificate. So now I'd like to call the students up who will be reading the resolution. We have several students. If they could come forward to this, right here in front of the speakers. Oh, okay. Actually, panelists, if you could please stand up. Mike Rahm is going to be taking a picture, a group photo.
Tell us where to look.
We'll now take a few moments to have a reading by students of a resolution in support of the creation of an articulation task force in ethnic studies. A similar version of this resolution will be considered by the Executive Board of the National Association for Ethnic Studies tomorrow.
Of this forum in support of increasing ethnic studies courses and programs of study in Arizona, and of the creation of an Arizona Ethnic Studies Articulation Task Force.
Whereas ethnic studies courses and programs of study develop an informed and active citizenry capable of critical thought, give voice to long-buried concerns, and ask hard questions that ultimately will result in greater appreciation of all people. And
whereas ethnic studies courses and programs of study have been shown to improve recruitment, retention, and graduation rates of students of color by offering them a rigorous curriculum relevant to their cultures, histories, and communities. And
whereas ethnic studies courses and programs of study strengthen bonds among educational institutions and with elements in the community, including businesses and nonprofit organizations through partnerships and collaborations. And
whereas ethnic studies courses and programs of study create connective pipelines from kindergartens through college and university. And
whereas political assaults in Arizona on ethnic studies courses and programs of study have marginalized and devalued them all the way through the college and university levels. And
whereas other courses and programs of study have articulation task forces under the state's Arizona Transfer Agency that consists transfers of credits from Arizona Community College to Arizona Public University, but ethnic studies does not. And
whereas the Arizona Transfer Steering Committee in June will consider applications for creation of an ethnic studies articulation task force. Now, therefore, be it resolved that this forum hereby encourages Arizona community colleges and universities to adopt and expand ethnic studies courses and programs of study to enhance and foster a multicultural worldview that honors our differences and our unifying values. And
be it further resolved that this forum supports the effort of ethnic students, professors, teachers, and advocates to have the Arizona Transfer Steering Committee create the Ethnic Studies Articulation Task Force that brings together experts in the field to promote the integration of ethnic studies into all aspects of academic and community life.
Thank you for those inspiring words. Thank you very much. Okay, are you hungry? It smells good, doesn't it? Okay, so lunch is ready. Everybody should have a ticket. We have, if you'd like to start a line and proceed with giving your ticket to one of the people standing there that will be collecting them. And we also have some live entertainment that will be starting. The music group Mario Cruz and the Trio Romántico has kindly agreed to play during our lunch hour. Buen provecho.